Why is it that when the other person takes a long time, he's slow, but when I take a long time, I'm thorough? Why is it when the other person does something without being told, he's overstepping his bounds, but when I do it, that's initiative? Why is it when the other person overlooks a rule of etiquette, he's rude, but when I skip a few rules, I'm original? Why is it when the other person pleases the boss, he's kissing up, but when I please the boss, that's cooperation? Why is it when the other person gets ahead, he's getting all the breaks, but when I get ahead, that's the reward for hard work? And why is it when the other person doesn't do it, he's lazy, but when I don't do it, I'm too busy? Busy. We wear it as a badge of honor. How you doing? Busy. Stop any pastor and ask him how it's going, and you'll likely get that response. I've said it and answered it that way myself many times. But you know what? Frankly, I'm beginning to dislike that word more and more. I mean, why is it when the other person doesn't do it, he's lazy, but when I don't do it, it's because I'm so busy? I mean, can a busy person be lazy? Would we dare call a workaholic lazy? Are you working furiously on one thing because you're trying to avoid doing something more difficult? Well, before we come to the greatest sermon ever in 2 weeks, I want to speak to an area that is very appropriate here on Labor Day weekend. This is really going to be a two-part sermon. I'm going to look at one aspect of it, and Pastor Dan will look at the flip side of it next Sunday. It's a two-part sermon because we must keep in tension the matter of work and rest. If all we do is work, then we are at risk physically, emotionally, relationally, and spiritually. We are at risk when all we do is work to lose perspective, to wrap our value around what we do, and to experience burnout. The Bible speaks to implementing rest for personal reflection and spiritual renewal, and to enjoying God's good gifts and deepening our trust in the God who provides. Stillness before God steadies us amidst the busyness and chaos of life. And as God leads, Pastor Dan will address that next Sunday. Well, this morning it is my task to speak to this matter of work. What is your attitude toward work? Is it the attitude that I saw expressed in the sign that read, "Hard work may not kill me, but why take the chance?" Or as one person put it, "Work fascinates me. I can sit and watch it for hours." Or as the bumper sticker I saw not even too long ago again, it so aptly expressed it, I owe, so off to work I go. I mean, is that your attitude? It's why I have to work. I owe. Well, it's not my purpose this morning to develop a theology of work, but to highlight the kind of workers we are to be. More than that, our subject goes beyond the workplace to address the need for diligence in all areas of our lives. And so hopefully, as we come to the end of our time today, we will all leave with a greater commitment to diligence in every aspect of our lives. Because we are encouraged to be people of diligence, committed to the tasks in life that need to get done. Now, what is it that can threaten accomplishment of those tasks? What is an enemy to diligence? I mean, if we know what needs to get done and even when it needs to get done, what is one thing that can block that from happening? It is the word laziness. Laziness. Now, at first pass, as I thought about this topic of laziness, I felt pretty sure of myself that this matter of laziness would hardly touch me. I mean, last week's topic on prayer and our study on the spiritual armor throughout the summer was very convicting to me every single week. But lazy? Who? Me? Not an issue. That is, if I picture laziness as that person who sits home all day eating bonbons and watching soaps. Or the person who just kind of stays in bed instead of going to work, or I can start to feel a little bit better about myself. Or that person who fails to show up to work or gives a half-hearted effort. If I think only of those terms, I might be off the hook. Then I did a study in the book of Proverbs on this subject, and it broadened my thinking. Writer and teacher John Ortberg expresses my sentiment as he speaks of the sloth, equating it to laziness. He says, in the past, I would have considered anything but sloth to be one of my problems because I seem to be so busy. Sloth doesn't necessarily mean we're doing nothing. Sloth is the failure to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done, like the kamikaze pilot who flew 17 missions. I know, it took a little while for me, and I really enjoyed that line. It's Orberg, I didn't say it. Or he continues, matter of fact, he says, I came gradually to the realization that this was a temptation. I would have a task that I didn't look forward to, say setting up an appointment to confront someone about a broken relationship. And suddenly a myriad of other tasks leaped up and begged to be done. I would clean my desk, call a staff meeting, write 2 articles for a newsletter we didn't even publish. I did a lot. But over time, I discovered that all too often, now get this, all too often I didn't do what needed to be done when it needed to be done. Let that sink in. I didn't do what needed to be done when it needed to be done. Now, suddenly, I'm not off the hook. In the book Wishful Thinking, the writer says this. He says, a slothful man may be a very busy man. He's a man who goes through the motions, who flies on automatic pilot. He's getting through his life. Now, I have to believe that you, like me, want to do better than simply getting through your life. But before you say, as I've done, lazy, who, me? Listen to what Proverbs has to say. You know, there's no book of the Bible that addresses this issue more eloquently than the book of Proverbs. So I'm going to invite you to turn to the book of Proverbs. It's right after Psalms. It's in the Old Testament. Now, as you're making your way to the book of Proverbs, you'll find as we look at this that Proverbs' favorite word for laziness is sluggard. Sluggard. Now, it's kind of a strange word. Sluggard's not really a contemporary word at all, but it's a good word picture. Because do you know what a slug is? That's the picture. Our modern dictionaries would define sluggard as one who's habitually lazy or habitually inactive. They just hardly move. In its original, the picture of a sluggard is one who leans against the wall and does nothing. He's negligent in the performing of his tasks or duties. Proverbs speaks of one who uses his wit rather than his strength to do what he wants to do. In other words, he is one who consumes more energy getting out of work than they consume doing a job. So this morning, a big task, so many Proverbs on this, but I'll put it under these 3 headings. It's going to be characteristics of laziness, then there's consequence of laziness, and then a corrective to laziness. So we got characteristics, and then consequence, and then corrective. Now, we're going to make 3 major stops in Proverbs, these 3 main chapters that speak to each of those headings, and I'll sprinkle in some other Proverbs along the way that shed some light on our topic. Well, our first stop, if you're there in Proverbs, go to Proverbs chapter 26. Proverbs chapter 26. In a moment, I'll be picking it up at verse 13. But, what I love about the book of Proverbs is that it deals with the day-to-day realities of life. They're true sayings that are placed in the bottom shelf where we can reach them. What we find in the book of Proverbs, we have to understand this about a proverb, is that they're general statements that are not concerned with exceptions and that teach us a spiritual lesson. We've got to be careful not to turning them into promises, because they're general statements, not concerned about exceptions, but they teach us a spiritual lesson. And it often, as we're going to see this morning, it uses playful language to make a serious point. That's what we find Proverbs chapter 26. Look with me at verse 13. Proverbs 26, verse 13. The sluggard says, there's a lion in the road, a fierce lion roaming the streets. As the door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. The sluggard buries his hand in the dish, and he's too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. The sluggard's wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who answer discreetly. Well, let's look at some characteristics of laziness just from this section. First of all, the first characteristic of laziness is he's happy making excuses. He's happy making excuses. Verse 13 tells us the reason he's not going about his work is because there's a lion in the road. A fierce lion at that. Now, I doubt that there's a lion out there. What's out there is a job. What's out there is a task to begin. What's out there is that unpleasant, hard thing that you'd rather not do. A sluggard can always find a reason for not doing what needs to be done. And he can even come up with imaginary hindrances. You see, if there's something you don't want to do, a lion in the streets is as good as reason as any. Stories told of Daniel Webster when he was a child, and one day his father had to be away from home for the day, and so he left Daniel and his brother Ezekiel specific work instructions. He gave them some chores that needed to get done before he returned home, and off he went. Well, when Daniel Webster's dad returned home, he saw that none of the chores were done. He went to the son's room and questioned his sons about their idleness. He first looked at Ezekiel and he said, "What have you been doing, Ezekiel?" "Nothing, Dad," was Ezekiel's reply. "Nothing." The father then turned to Daniel and asked, "Well, Daniel, what have you been doing?" And Daniel quickly replied, "Helping Ezekiel." So I guess that's the best they could come out with. They might as well have said there was a lion in the street. But have you listened to yourself lately give that reason for not doing something? After all, there's a lion out there. What is your lion that's holding you back? What fierce lion has you paralyzed? What excuse have you been hiding behind? An excuse has been aptly called a skin of reason stuffed with a lie. It looks like a reason on the outside, but at the heart of it, it's really a lie. And the scary thing is, after a while, you'll convince yourself that the excuse is real. You're going to start to believe it. See, we're all prone to excuses to get out of what we don't want to do, the unpleasant thing, the hard thing. A man went to his doctor and told him he wasn't able to do the things around the house that he used to do. So he said, "I need to find out what's wrong." And so the doctor examined him, and when the exam was complete, he said to him, "Now, Doc, I can take it. Just tell me in plain English, what's wrong with me?" "Well, in plain English," the doctor said, "you're just lazy." "Okay," said the man. "Now give me the medical term so I can tell my wife." I mean, really, is it I can't or I won't? A sluggard's happy making excuses. Well, a second characteristic is he's hinged to his bed. He's hinged to his bed. Verse 14, with a little touch of humor, says, the door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. I couldn't help myself but to think of that some of you experienced this earlier this past week as you got your child up for school. Right? You probably heard something like, 5 more minutes, please, just 5 more minutes. It will appear as though they're stuck to their bed. You might even go wake them up and roll them over, and then they'll spring back to their sleep position. Right? You get a picture here? As a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed. Now, I'm not asking you to use that verse on your kids this week. That's not where I'm going with this. But there's a good picture there. There's great sarcasm in speaking of the sluggard. It's for the purpose of catching our attention. The sluggard is hinged to his bed. He can't get out. Well, what's this saying? They love sleep. Now, this is more than that occasional sleeping in on a rainy day. Perhaps you felt like doing this morning. Or turning off your alarm and staying in bed a little bit longer. This here describes a lifestyle. He is stuck to his bed. And even if he attempted to roll out of bed, he would spring right back into sleep mode because he loves sleep. He really doesn't want to go out and face the world. Face that thing that he has to face. So the lazy person isn't willing to exert the energy needed to get up. I mean, there's plenty of movement as he rolls back and forth, and the picture might even be here of some sense of restlessness. So there's a lot of movement as he rolls back and forth in his bed, but there's no progress. Guess what? You can have movement without progress. Does that describe us? Does that describe you? You know, it can even describe the church, the 21st century. Lots and lots of movement. But is there progress that goes along with it? Is there a little laziness in the church today? Is there some laziness in me? We have a schedule packed full of activity for ourselves and for our kids. There's plenty of movement. But I ask you, face it, ask honestly, is there progress? Is there progress? Dare to ask that question. See, one hinged to their bed is not one who really refuses to do anything. He just puts off bit by bit, kidding himself that he'll get around to it someday. Which really leads to our third characteristic of laziness. Not only is happy making excuses and he's hinged to his bed, he's hopeless at completing things. He's hopeless at completing things. The sluggard, it says, verse 15, the sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He's too lazy to bring it back to his mouth. Again, we're meant to see a little humor in this saying. It's as if the sluggard goes to the cupboard, he gets some cereal, he gets his Fruit Loops, and he goes back and he pours the Fruit Loops into a bowl, and he pours some milk into it. He sits down at the table and he says, I just can't do it. I can't even lift my spoon to my mouth. And you say, that's absurd. I thought so too. Then I thought about this. I'm sitting on the couch watching TV and I can't find the remote. So I yell out, where's the remote? Because for some reason, I figure if the remote is missing, it's someone else's fault. No elbowing here. But what do? I remain on the couch watching some dumb show because I can't find the remote to change the channel. To change the channel that is only a few feet away from me. Getting up and changing the channel for some reason is not an option. That's a contemporary version of verse 15. The point to drive home here is even if a lazy person starts something, he doesn't complete it. He's unwilling to get up and do something about the situation. Even if the situation is ugly, he'd rather stay in the predictable mess rather than follow through on a solution. He'll choose comfort and convenience over the hard work of follow-through. Listen, anyone can start things. That's not a big deal. If you start things, don't start hooraying and giving everyone high fives. Anybody can start things. That is easy. There are plenty of starters in the world. God calls us to be finishers. Proverbs 12:27 gives a similar thought. It says, the lazy man does not roast his game. That's a picture of one who will hunt for his food, but then lacks the energy and drive to cook what he found. It's as if you go home today and you put some steak on the grill, and then you don't have the energy or will to turn on the grill and cook your steak. See, a sluggard, a lazy person, makes the soft choice, the one that will inconvenience him the most. The least. The least. I love the story. The old mountaineer and his wife, they're sitting in front of the fireplace one evening, just passing time, and after a long silence, the wife says, Jed, I think it's raining. Can you get up and go out and see? The old mountaineer has continued to gaze into the fire. He just doesn't want to move. He's too lazy to move. Just wants to sit there. So he sighs and says, nah, why don't we just call him the dog and see if he's wet? Makes sense. See, life is a constant choice. Test this. Life is a constant choice between comfort and growth. Between going the easy way or the hard way. What will it require to complete a task? Well, it's more than intentions and desire. Because Proverbs 13:4 has this to say, the sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. Now in this proverb, there's a parallelism of thought here, and that both the sluggard, the lazy, and the diligent have this in common. Both have cravings, both have desires, both have intentions. That's what it's saying in Proverbs 13:4. But what it's saying also here is that a lazy person, however, a sluggard, talks a good talk. But it isn't that he doesn't have any dreams or aspirations. He just lacks what is needed to reach that dream. His motto is, don't rush me. So he just keeps talking about what he's going to do tomorrow. Listen to these words. He's going to be all that a mortal should be tomorrow. No one should be kinder or braver than he tomorrow. A friend who was troubled and weary he knew, who'd be glad of a lift and who needed it too. On him he would call and see what he could do tomorrow. Each morning he stacked up the letters he'd write tomorrow and thought of the folks he would fill with delight tomorrow. It was too bad, indeed, he was busy today and hadn't a minute to stop on his way. More time he would have to give others, he'd say, tomorrow. The greatest of workers this man would have been tomorrow. The world would have known him had he ever seen tomorrow. But the fact is he died and he faded from view, and all that he left here when living was through was a mountain of things he intended to do tomorrow. Tomorrow. As the slick-talking brass band salesman and the music man said, never put off till tomorrow what you can put off indefinitely. That's what we do. Do we really mean tomorrow? Has tomorrow kind of been a regular part of your vocabulary? Is there something you know you should do, but you've put off until tomorrow? See, often the lazy person, the one who feels so overwhelmed that he does nothing at all, he sees all he has to do and says, I can't do it all, so I'm just going to put it all off till tomorrow. See, a sluggard, lazy person, the master of unfinished business. And after a while, it shows. Because if you pass up opportunities to grow today, there'll come a day when you're going to hit a wall. And that's what we see next. And the consequence of laziness. I want to look at the consequence of laziness. And I want to walk by the field of a sluggard. And so go back with me 2 chapters to chapter 24. Proverbs 24. We're going to look at verses 30 through 34. 30 through 34. Proverbs 24, verse 30. When I went past the field of the sluggard, past the vineyard of the man who lacks judgment, thorns had come up everywhere, the ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. I applied my heart to what I observed and learned a lesson from what I saw. A little sleep, meaning a little more sleep. A little slumber, just a little more slumber. A little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty is going to come on you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man. We see the payoff for neglect is wastefulness. The payoff for neglect is wastefulness. He doesn't do what needed to be done when it needed to be done, then he has nothing come harvest time. Proverbs 20, verse 4 says the same thing. A sluggard does not plow in season, so at harvest time he looks but finds nothing. It's been said this way: if you want a harvest tomorrow, you can't wait till tomorrow to plow and plants. In other words, let me say it simply as this: we can't expect fruit in places we haven't been intentionally planting in. We can't expect fruit in places we haven't been intentionally planting in. Don't expect to see positive results if you haven't given anything to it. So we kind of want that. We want the benefits of community. We want the benefits of a good marriage. We want the benefits of fill in the blank, but we're not planting there. So if we're too lazy to plow, it's saying here, don't expect a harvest. Now I want you to think beyond the workplace. Because the principle applies to other areas of our lives. Because if we're neglecting the important matters of life and godliness, we shouldn't be surprised that we are impoverished and we're depleted and we're drained. What happens to a soul left to itself? I mean, if a neglected field is unpleasant to look at, then what about a neglected soul? See, we can't expect fruit in places we haven't been intentionally planting it. So I asked some hard questions here. They've gone through me. Are you intentionally planting in relationships? Are you intentionally planting in spiritual disciplines? Are you intentionally planting in your kids? Are you intentionally planting in your marriage? Are you intentionally planting in lives, serving, ministry? See, the question isn't, am I lazy in all of my life? It is not, am I lazy completely? But rather, are there areas in my life in which I'm being lazy? Because it is possible to be a hard worker in one part of your life and then another part of your life be lazy. Might we be using work as an excuse for not doing what we ought to be doing? Are we avoiding a more important thing? Are we lazy spiritually? Scott Peck aptly put it, ultimately there's one great impediment to spiritual growth, and that is laziness. Any sluggard in you? Is it starting to show? Well, here's the corrective to laziness. Here's the corrective. We saw the consequence just now. We saw the characteristics. Here's the corrective to laziness. There's one more passage to look at this morning from Proverbs. It's Proverbs chapter 6. So go back to Proverbs chapter 6. It's the section from which I arrived at my title, Lessons from an Ant. And I don't mean the one who's married to Uncle Charlie. I don't know why people say it that way. I was in New York. I had to really switch my thinking because I always said aunt, because that's the way you're supposed to say it. And they always said aunt. Well, I'm talking not about the one who's married to an uncle, but rather that little bug that can be a nuisance at a picnic or in your kitchen. And if there's any laziness, what should we do? Proverbs would tell us, go to ant school. And take good notes. Well, what lessons can we learn from the ants? Well, listen to what it says, verse 6 of Proverbs 6. Chapter 6, verse 6 says, "Go to the ant, you sluggard." Now, how humbling is that? Here's a man standing 5 to 6 feet above a tiny insect, and he's being told to bend down and learn from his ways. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer, no ruler. What does it say? He doesn't need any external motivation. Go to the ant. He manages without being told. I mean, if you take a look at an anthill, you won't see ants just sitting around or standing around doing nothing. Every one of those ants have a job, and no one has to tell them what it is, and no one has to push them to do it or guilt them into it to do it. They just go ahead and do it. Be like the ants. Don't wait for the church to program it. Don't wait for me or someone else to tell you to go do it. Don't wait for someone to organize a group to go do that thing that might be on your heart. Or to go meet some need, or wait until you have some official title. Go pick up a branch, go pick up whatever it is and carry it out. Work hard at it. Give it your all. Because not only does an ant not need any external motivation, another lesson we learned from an ant is that it's a hard worker. You never see an ant just chilling. They're the epitome of diligence. Now it's said that an ant's able to lift 20 times their own body weight. Now if that's true, that means that if I had the strength, that kind of strength, I could lift approximately 4,000 pounds. Ants have been found to build structures, they say, of 500 times their own heights. The life expectancy of an ant is 45 to 60 days. So I guess I'm not seeing the same ones in my kitchen. They switch out. Yet these tiny little creatures accomplish much in their short lifespan. We learn the lessons from an ant. They don't need external motivation, and they're hardworking. What's the corrective to laziness? One word. Gave it to you at the beginning. Diligence. Diligence. We're to work with diligence, church, in all that we do. I would love it if Christians worked so hard at their jobs, no matter what that job was, that they were well known for working hard and being diligent. That if a Christian went for a job interview and the employer said, "Whoa, you're a Christian? I don't need to hear anymore. You're hired." You often hear the opposite. I have. You're a Christian? I'm not doing business with you. You're a Christian? Nope, not hiring you. I had a Christian back there work for me. Nope. Never hire one again. And yet Colossians 3:23. Here's the New Testament primary verse for this morning. Colossians 3:23 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart." Why? Working for the Lord and not for men. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men. Even when working for that jerk boss? Even when working at some menial job while I wait for my dream job? Even when I don't feel like working, or I don't like my job and I don't like the people I work with? Even when, fill in the blank. Whatever you do, no qualifier, whatever you do, and you have to then ask, what is your whatever that calls for your working at it with all your heart? What is it? You got to fill it in. What's the whatever? that calls for you working at it with all your heart. Church, diligence pays off. If not now, later. Again, a lesson from the ants. What's the payoff for their hard work? Look at verse 8. It says, "Yet it stores its provision in summer and gathers its food at harvest." This is the contrast to what we just saw with the sluggards. He didn't plant, he saw nothing later. Well, for this ant that we're to learn from, fruitfulness tomorrow requires diligence today. What are you doing today so there's a harvest tomorrow? What are you giving effort to presently that's going to bear fruitfulness later? Listen, it takes work to build a strong marriage. It takes work to engage with our children and disciple them. It takes energy to care for others in the community of believers. It takes work to check in with a sister or brother in Christ to see how they're doing. Pursuing fellowship requires work. Sharing the gospel is not for the lazy. I ask myself, I'm not going to compartmentalize this. Is there any laziness, sluggard in you? Are you avoiding a more important thing? So you're getting all wrapped up and busy here. What is it that needs to get done? When will you begin? When? See, we can't expect to do it all and pack it all in and at the same time do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. Because God's way is steep. It is not an easy climb. A group of people were preparing for an ascent to the top of Mont Blanc in France and the Swiss Alps. And on the evening before the climb, a French guide outlined the prerequisite for success. He said to the group there, he said, "You're only going to reach the top by taking just the necessary equipment for climbing and leaving behind all unnecessary accessories because it's a difficult climb." Well, a young Englishman that was there disagreed, and he showed up on the day of the climb, and he had rather a heavy, brightly colored blanket. He had some large pieces of cheese. He had a bottle of wine. He had a couple of cameras and several lenses hanging around his neck, and he had some bars of chocolate. The guide looked at him and said, "You're never going to make it to the top with all that stuff. You can only take the bare necessities to make this climb." Well, but strong-willed as he was, he set off on his own in front of the rest of the group to prove to them he could do it. And off he went. He was a star. He was flying. The group followed behind under the direction of the guide with just the bare necessities. And all the way to the summit of Mont Blanc, they began to notice certain things along the trail. First, they saw a brightly colored blanket there off to the sides. They went a little bit further and they saw some pieces of cheese. They continued on this trail and there was a bottle of wine and then they kept going and there was a camera equipment and then even they saw some chocolate bars all on the trail. Finally, when they reached the top, they discovered Englishman was there having dumped everything in the process. Will you make it to the top? Are you trying to do it all? It's a convicting question. I'm trying to do it all sometimes. Are you trying to do it all? Is there anything you've filled your life with that's hindering your spiritual climb? And it's time for you to dump some things along the way in order to give to that which is long-lasting, eternal. How is busyness an escape for you from the hard work of building intimacy in your marriage or establishing friendships with others or serving in the church or knowing Christ better? Is trying to do too much inhibiting you from working at what you're doing with all of your heart? There's a payoff for diligence. There's also a payoff for neglect. Will we resolve to be diligent in all matters? Are we single-minded? Are we wholehearted to what matters the most in